She arrived in a black car worth more than his entire street. A woman who commanded empires from a wheelchair, who made grown men in boardrooms sweat through their $1,000 suits. And she looked Liam Hayes dead in the eye, rain dripping from her perfect hair, and said the 5 words that would wreck his whole world. I want you to father my child. He was nobody, a construction worker with calloused hands and a daughter who needed new shoes. But what Aurora Vale wanted, Aurora Vale got. Except this time she had no idea what she was really asking for. If you want to see how a broken man and an untouchable woman destroy each other's walls, stay until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let me see just how far this story travels. Part 1. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight by the time Liam Hayes pulled his truck into the gravel driveway. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the wipers scrape across the windshield one last time before they went still. His shoulders ached. His lower back felt like someone had taken a crowbar to it. 12 hours of pouring concrete in August heat, and then the sky had opened up around 4 in the afternoon and turned the whole job site into a mud pit. Danny Reeves had slipped off a scaffold and twisted his ankle, which meant Liam covered Danny's section too, because that was what you did when there were only 9 guys on a crew and the foreman was already looking for reasons to cut hours. He grabbed his thermos and his lunch bag, empty except for half a granola bar Chloe had shoved in there this morning with a note that said, "For Daddy, from Chloe," spelled correctly this time, and pushed the truck door open with his boot. The house looked the same as it always did. Small, white paint peeling near the gutters. Porch light on because he'd taught Chloe to flip it before she went to bed, even though Mrs. Huang from next door was always there to babysit and would have done it herself. There was a tricycle on the lawn that Chloe hadn't ridden in 2 years but refused to let him donate. A garden hose coiled near the steps like a sleeping snake, the kind of house that said, "Someone lives here, but just barely." Liam walked up the porch steps and stopped. There was a light on inside that shouldn't have been on. The kitchen light, the one with the flickering bulb he kept meaning to replace. Mrs. Huang always turned everything off except the porch and the hallway nightlight. He'd told her 100 times. Electricity bill's tight, just leave what Chloe needs to feel safe. He opened the front door slowly. "Mrs. Huang?" No answer. He set his thermos on the hallway table and walked toward the kitchen. The linoleum floor was still sticky from whatever Chloe had spilled at dinner, probably juice, always juice, and his work boots tracked mud with every step. He'd clean it later. He always cleaned it later. Mrs. Huang was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in her lap, and there was a look on her face Liam had never seen before. She was 71 years old, had survived a husband who drank, raised 4 kids in a house smaller than this one, and once chased a raccoon out of her garage with a broom. Nothing rattled her. She looked rattled. "What happened?" Liam said immediately. "Is Chloe okay?" "Chloe's fine, sleeping, out cold since 8:30. Mrs. Huang paused. "Liam, someone came by tonight." "Who?" Mrs. Huang unfolded her hands and then folded them again. "A woman. In a wheelchair. Very expensive looking. Had a driver and a man in a suit standing by the car." She hesitated. "She asked for you by name." Liam stared at her. "What?" "She said she'd come back tomorrow. Left a card." Mrs. Huang pushed a small white card across the table. Liam picked it up. Heavy cardstock, the kind that felt like money. Embossed lettering. No logo, no company name, just a name and a phone number. Aurora Vale. He turned the card over. Blank on the back. "You know her?" Mrs. Huang asked. "No." "She seemed like she knew you." "I don't know anyone named Aurora Vale." He set the card down. "What did she say exactly?" "She said she needed to speak with you about a private matter. I told her you weren't home. She said she understood, and she'd return." Mrs. Huang pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Liam, the car she came in, it was the kind of car you see in movies. And the man in the suit, he opened the door for her and set up a ramp. A ramp. Right there on the sidewalk, like they'd done it 1,000 times." Liam ran a hand through his wet hair. "Probably got the wrong house." "She used your full name, Liam Michael Hayes." That stopped him. He looked at the card again, then slid it into his back pocket. Go home, Mrs. Huang. I'm sorry she bothered you. She didn't bother me. She scared me a little, if I'm being honest. Mrs. Huang stood and gathered her purse. There was something about her eyes, like she'd already decided something, and she was just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. After Mrs. Huang left, Liam locked the front door, checked the back door, and walked down the hallway to Chloe's room. He pushed the door open just enough to see her. She was sprawled diagonally across the bed, one foot hanging off the edge, her stuffed rabbit wedged under her chin. The nightlight cast a pale blue glow across the wall, and she was breathing with her mouth wide open, the way she always did. 7 years old. Looked more like Jess every month. Same dark hair, same stubborn chin, same way of squinting when she thought someone was being stupid. Sometimes he'd catch her making an expression, and it would hit him so hard he'd have to leave the room. Jess had been gone for 5 years. 5 years, 2 months, 11 days. Not that he was counting anymore. The counting had stopped around year 3 when his therapist, the one he saw for exactly 4 sessions before he couldn't afford it, told him that keeping track of the days was a way of holding the door open for grief to walk back in whenever it wanted. He'd stopped counting. The grief came anyway. Liam closed Chloe's door gently and went to take a shower. The water pressure was weak and the hot water lasted about 8 minutes, which was fine because he'd learned to shower in 6. He stood under the lukewarm stream and let the day wash off him. Concrete dust, sweat, rain, the faint smell of diesel from the generator they'd been running since the site's power hookup blew last week. He thought about the card in his back pocket. Aurora Vale. The name meant nothing to him. He didn't read business magazines. He didn't watch the news unless it was weather or sports. His world was this house, the job site, Chloe's school, the grocery store on 9th Street, and Mrs. Huang's kitchen when she insisted on feeding him things his own mother would have been proud of. That was the full map. Everything else was noise. He went to bed at 11:15 and set his alarm for faste patrals. The next day was Saturday, which meant no work, which meant Chloe time. They had a routine. Pancakes from a box because Liam's attempt at scratch pancakes 3 years ago had produced something Chloe described as a crime. Then cartoons until 10, then outside if the weather cooperated. The weather did not cooperate. Rain again. Heavier than last night. The kind of rain that turned gutters into rivers and made the roof leak in the corner of the bathroom, where Liam had patched it twice already with materials that probably weren't rated for what he was asking them to do. So they stayed inside. Chloe set up a complicated kingdom on the living room floor using couch cushions, 2 chairs, a blanket, and every stuffed animal she owned, which was 17. Liam sat on the floor beside her and played the role he always played, the visiting knight who had to ask the queen's permission to enter the kingdom. State your business, Chloe said, holding a spatula like a scepter. I come seeking shelter from the storm, Your Majesty. What do you offer in return? Pancakes? Already had those. Try again. My undying loyalty, and also I'll fix that thing on your bike. Chloe considered this. Acceptable. You may enter, but you have to sit next to Gerald. She pointed to a stuffed frog that had one eye missing. Gerald and I go way back, Liam said, settling in. Chloe grinned at him, and for about 20 seconds the world was exactly the right size. The doorbell rang at 11:40. Liam wasn't expecting anyone. Mrs. Huang had her own key and never rang the bell. The mail carrier didn't come on Saturdays anymore since they'd changed the route. He told Chloe to stay in her kingdom and went to the door. He opened it. The woman on the porch was sitting in a wheelchair that probably cost more than his truck. Sleek, black, with some kind of carbon frame and wheels that looked like they belonged on a racing bike. She was wearing a dark blue coat, not a jacket, a coat, the kind that had structure and intention. And her hair was black, straight, pulled back from her face in a way that made every feature sharp and deliberate. She had high cheekbones, a jaw that could have been drawn by an architect, and eyes that were so dark they seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. She was, objectively, one of the most striking women he had ever seen. She was also completely soaked. Behind her, at the curb, a black sedan sat with its engine running. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, holding an umbrella that he clearly should have been holding over her instead of himself. Mr. Hayes, the woman said. Not a question. A fact. Yeah, my name is Aurora Vale. I came by last night, but you weren't home. I know. My neighbor told me. May I come in? Liam looked at her, looked at the rain, looked at the man by the car. Who are you? I told you, Aurora Vale. That's a name, not an answer. Something flickered in her expression. Not offense, something closer to surprise, like she wasn't used to people asking follow-up questions. I'm the CEO and majority owner of Vale Enterprises, she said. We develop commercial real estate, primarily in the Northeast. Our holdings include, I don't care about your holdings. Then may I come inside and tell you what I do care about? Chloe's voice came from behind him. Daddy, who's at the door? Liam half turned. Nobody, sweetheart. Go back to your kingdom. Is it a dragon? No dragons. Go. He turned back to Aurora Vale, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. The rain was getting worse. Water was pooling on the porch, creeping toward the doorframe. The whole situation felt wrong. A woman like this on a porch like his, but he wasn't going to leave someone sitting in the rain, wheelchair or not, billionaire or not. 5 minutes, he said, and stepped aside. Getting inside was awkward. The doorway was narrow, and there was a slight lip at the threshold that Liam hadn't thought about in 7 years of living here. Aurora navigated it without asking for help, but he saw her hands tighten on the wheels, and he saw the small adjustment she made, practiced, automatic, that told him she'd been doing this for a long time. The living room was a disaster. Cushions everywhere, stuffed animals, a half-eaten granola bar on the coffee table. Chloe's kingdom was directly in the path from the front door to the couch, and Aurora had to wheel around a chair draped in a blanket that had been designated, according to the sign taped to it in crayon, as the Dungeon. Dungeon, Liam said automatically. She's working on spelling. I see that, Aurora said. She didn't smile, but the corners of her mouth did something that might have been close. Chloe was standing in the hallway, watching. She had her spatula in one hand and Gerald, the one-eyed frog, in the other. She stared at Aurora's wheelchair with the kind of unfiltered curiosity that only children can get away with. Your chair has cool wheels, Chloe said. Thank you, Aurora said. Can it do tricks? Not the kind you're imagining. Chloe accepted this and retreated to her kingdom. Aurora watched her go and something passed across her face. Fast. Gone almost before it arrived. Something soft and aching that she covered immediately with a straightening of her spine and a squaring of her shoulders. Mr. Hayes, Liam, I'll be direct because I respect your time and I don't enjoy small talk. Good. I don't either. She reached into a leather bag hanging from the side of her wheelchair and pulled out a thin folder. Dark blue, no labels. She held it in her lap but didn't open it. I'm 30 years old, she said. I built my company from nothing after a car accident when I was 22 that left me paralyzed from the waist down. I have more money than most people can conceptualize. I have homes in 4 cities. I have a staff of over 1,200 people. I have everything a person could reasonably want. She paused. And I want a child. Liam waited. I've explored every conventional option, she continued. Her voice was steady, controlled, measured, like she'd rehearsed this. IVF, surrogacy agencies, adoption through traditional channels. For various medical and legal reasons I won't bore you with, none of those paths have been viable for me, which brings me to an unconventional option. She opened the folder and held out a single sheet of paper. Liam didn't take it. What is this? A proposal. I've had my legal team draft a preliminary agreement. A preliminary what? An agreement, outlining terms, compensation, expectations, timelines. Stop. Liam held up a hand. The word came out harder than he intended, but he didn't soften it. Are you asking me what I think you're asking me? Aurora met his eyes. No wavering, no blinking. I'm asking you to help me have a child. Yes. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Liam could hear the rain on the roof, Chloe talking to Gerald in the other room, the ticking of the kitchen clock that was always 2 minutes fast. How do you even know who I am? He said. I had my team research candidates, men with specific qualities, stable employment history, no criminal record, strong parenting track record,
Healthy Family Medical History. Your name appeared on a list. A list? Yes. You put fathers on a list, like a catalog. Aurora's jaw tightened slightly. That's not how I would characterize. That's exactly what it is. Liam stood up. He'd been sitting on the arm of the couch, and now he was standing over her, which felt wrong in a way he didn't fully understand, so he took a step back.
You came to my house, where my daughter lives, with a folder and a contract, and you're asking me to what? Donate? Participate? What's the word your legal team used? The terms are flexible. The terms. He laughed, and it wasn't a kind laugh. Lady, I don't know what world you live in, but in this one, having a kid isn't a term. It's not a deliverable. It's not something you negotiate in a folder. I understand this is unusual. Unusual. My daughter is in the next room building a castle out of couch cushions, and you're sitting in my living room asking me to make you a baby like it's a business transaction. That's not unusual. That's insane. Aurora's face didn't change, but her hands did. They gripped the folder tighter, and her knuckles went pale, and Liam noticed, because 5 years of solo parenting had taught him to watch hands more than faces, that there was a slight tremor in her left wrist, barely visible, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. I think you should go, he said. She didn't argue. She closed the folder, placed it back in her bag, and wheeled toward the front door. She moved with the same practiced efficiency she'd shown coming in. No hesitation, no awkward adjustments. When she reached the threshold, she paused without turning around. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I didn't come here to offend you. I came because I'm running out of options, and I don't know how to do this the way normal people do. I've never known how to do anything the way normal people do. Then she went down the ramp that Liam now noticed her driver had placed against the porch step while they'd been talking. The man with the umbrella opened the car door. The ramp folded. The door closed. The sedan pulled away. Chloe appeared beside him. Who was that? Nobody, kiddo. She seemed sad. Liam looked at his daughter. What makes you say that? Her eyes. They were the same as yours sometimes. He didn't know what to do with that, so he closed the door and told her to clean up her kingdom, because lunch was in 20 minutes. He couldn't stop thinking about it. That was the thing that bothered him the most. Not what she'd asked, not the folder, not the sheer audacity of showing up on a stranger's porch with a proposition like that. What bothered him was that he couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 days later, he was on the job site, hauling rebar with Danny, whose ankle was taped but functional, and his brain kept circling back to her face. Specifically, to the moment right before she left, when she'd said the thing about not knowing how to do things the way normal people do. The way her voice had changed. Not louder, not softer, just different. Like a wall had shifted an inch and let something through that she hadn't planned on showing. You're quiet, Danny said. I'm always quiet. Nah, you're regular quiet most days. This is weird quiet. Something happened? Liam considered telling Danny. Danny was the closest thing he had to a friend, a 36-year-old divorced electrician's apprentice who talked too much and laughed too loud and had once driven 40 minutes in the middle of the night to help Liam fix a burst pipe because Chloe's room was flooding. Danny was good people, but how do you tell good people that a woman in a wheelchair worth probably $500 million showed up at your house and asked you to help her have a baby? Nothing happened, Liam said. You're a terrible liar, Hayes. And you're behind on your section. Move it. Danny moved it, but he gave Liam a look that said, I know you're full of it, and I'll ask again later. That night, after Chloe was in bed, Liam sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the card. Aurora Vale. He turned it over in his fingers. Then he did something he almost never did. He opened his laptop, the ancient Dell that took 4 minutes to boot up and sounded like a helicopter when the fan kicked in, and he searched her name. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Aurora Vale wasn't just rich. She was the kind of rich that came with magazine covers and investor profiles and lists with names like Under 40 Power Players and Women Reshaping American Business. Vale Enterprises had a portfolio worth somewhere north of $3 billion. She'd taken a small real estate firm her father had left her, more debt than assets when he'd died, and turned it into one of the most aggressive development companies on the East Coast. And she'd done all of it from a wheelchair. He found the story about the accident. She'd been 22, driving back from a site visit in upstate New York. Black ice on the highway. Her car hit a guardrail, went over an embankment, rolled 3 times. She'd spent 4 months in the hospital, 6 surgeries, years of physical therapy. Walked into her company's first board meeting, figuratively, 14 months after the crash, and fired 3 of the 4 existing board members. There were photos of her at galas and fundraisers, always in the wheelchair, always in something dark and perfectly tailored, always with an expression that dared anyone to feel sorry for her. There were quotes from competitors calling her ruthless, quotes from former employees calling her cold. One profile described her as the most feared woman in commercial real estate, and possibly the loneliest. Liam closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the house settle around him. The fridge hummed, the clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and then gave up. He thought about loneliness. He knew it the way you know a roommate you didn't choose, intimately, resentfully, with a grudging acceptance that it wasn't leaving anytime soon. After Jess died, the loneliness had been a physical thing, like a weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He'd learned to live with it. He'd learned to fill the space with Chloe's laughter and Danny's bad jokes and Mrs. Huang's cooking and the exhaustion of 10-hour shifts that left him too tired to feel anything at all. But it was still there. Every night after Chloe was asleep, it was still there. He wondered if Aurora Vale sat in some enormous empty house somewhere and felt the same thing. If she lay awake at night in a bed that was too big, in a room that was too quiet, and felt the same hollow ache that he felt. If she'd learned the same trick he had, filling the space with something, anything, so you didn't have to look at the emptiness directly. She'd filled it with an empire. He'd filled it with overtime. Same strategy, different tax brackets. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself she was a stranger, a bizarre interruption in an ordinary life, and that he'd never see her again. He kept the card. 6 days after her first visit, on a Friday afternoon, Liam came home from work to find Chloe sitting on the front porch with a juice box and an expression of enormous excitement. "Daddy, the cool wheelchair lady is back." Liam stopped on the walkway. "What?" "She's inside talking to Mrs. Huang. Mrs. Huang made tea." He took the porch steps 2 at a time and walked into the house. Aurora Vale was indeed sitting in his kitchen at his table, drinking tea from one of Mrs. Huang's floral mugs. Mrs. Huang was sitting across from her, and they appeared to be in the middle of a conversation about gardening. "Liam," Mrs. Huang said, "your friend is back." "She's not my friend." Aurora set the mug down. She was dressed differently today, still expensive. He could tell by the way the fabric fell, but less formal. A dark sweater, simple jewelry, no folder. "I know I should have called," she said. "You should have called before the first time." "You're right, I should have." She met his eyes. "I didn't come with a contract today. No folder, no proposal, no legal team. I just—" She stopped. The pause was so uncharacteristic from everything he'd seen of her that it caught his attention. "I just wanted to talk. If you're willing." Mrs. Huang stood up with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had been creating private moments for other people for 5 decades. "I'll take Chloe to the park. It stopped raining." She was out the door before Liam could object, and he heard Chloe's delighted shriek as they headed down the sidewalk. He sat down across from Aurora. The kitchen felt smaller with her in it, not because of the wheelchair, but because of her presence, the controlled intensity she carried, the way she took up space not physically, but atmospherically. "Talk about what?" he said. "About why I really came to see you." She wrapped her hands around the mug, and again he noticed the faint tremor in her left wrist. "The proposal I made last week, it was real. I meant it, but I went about it in the worst possible way, and I think I did that on purpose." "Why would you do that on purpose?" "Because if I made it a transaction, it couldn't hurt me. If it was a contract, it was controllable. If you said no, which you did, it was a business rejection, not a personal one." She looked at him. "I've been structuring my entire life that way for 8 years, turning everything into a deal so I never have to feel the part where someone might say no to me as a person." Liam studied her face. The controlled mask was still there, but it had cracks in it now, small ones, around the eyes, around the mouth. The kind of cracks that happen when someone is trying very hard to hold something together and almost succeeding. "Why me, though?" he asked. Out of all the people in the world, and I mean that literally, you could probably afford to fly anyone anywhere. Why a construction worker in a bad neighborhood with a leaky roof?" "Because of Chloe." He tensed. "What about Chloe?" "My team didn't just compile names on a list, they compiled profiles, backgrounds. I read about your wife's passing. I read about the 3 jobs you worked in the first year after she died. I read about the time you turned down a foreman position because it required overnight travel and you refused to be away from your daughter." Aurora paused. "Do you know what I saw in that profile? A guy who can't get ahead? A father who chose his child over everything else, every time, without exception." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "I don't know what that looks like from the inside. I've never had it. My mother left when I was 6. My father was a good man, but he was broken by her leaving, and he spent the rest of his life working instead of parenting. I raised myself in an office building." She set the mug down. "I want a child because I want to do it differently. I want to do it the way you do it, present, messy, real, but I don't know how to start." Liam was quiet for a long time. "That's a nicer speech than last time," he finally said. "It's not a speech. It sounds like one. Everything I say sounds like one. It's a problem." The corner of her mouth twitched, not a smile, but the ghost of one. "My therapist says I over-articulate as a defense mechanism. I told her that was an over-articulation of the problem." Liam almost laughed. "Almost. Your therapist sounds smart." "She's terrifying, actually. Worse than any board member I've ever faced." He leaned back in his chair. The kitchen clock ticked. The fridge hummed. Outside, he could hear Chloe's distant laughter from the direction of the park. "I can't do what you originally asked," he said. "That's not changing." "I know. And I'm not interested in being anyone's project or charity case or whatever this is." "I know that too. So what do you actually want?" Aurora Vale, CEO, billionaire, the most feared woman in commercial real estate, looked at Liam Hayes with an expression that stripped away every layer of corporate armor she'd spent 8 years building. And underneath it, just for a second, was something he recognized, something he saw in his own mirror every morning. The look of a person who was so tired of being alone that they'd driven to a stranger's house in the rain just to sit in a kitchen that smelled like juice and burnt pancakes and feel, even for a moment, like they were somewhere that mattered. "I want to know how you do it," she said quietly. "How you wake up every day and just be a person for someone." The rain started again outside. The fridge hummed. Chloe's laughter carried faintly through the window. "Stay for dinner," Liam said. He didn't know why he said it. He'd regret it, probably. It was a terrible idea for at least 15 reasons he could list right now. "Chloe's going to want to show you her kingdom. Fair warning. You'll have to sit next to Gerald." "Who's Gerald?" "You'll see." Aurora looked at him. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not dramatic, not cinematic, not the kind of moment you'd put in a movie with swelling music and soft lighting, just a small human thing. A door opening an inch. "Okay," she said, and that was how it started. Not with a contract or a proposal or a grand gesture, with burnt pancakes and a one-eyed frog and a 7-year-old girl who would change everything without even trying. Dinner that first night was a disaster, and not the kind anyone could have predicted. Liam had planned to make spaghetti, his one reliable dish, the meal Chloe requested at least 3 times a week, because he'd figured out how to make the sauce taste close enough to the jarred stuff that she didn't complain. But the moment Chloe came back from the park with Mrs. Huang and saw Aurora still sitting in the kitchen, she launched into a full performance. She dragged Gerald off the couch, introduced him formally. "This is Gerald. He lost his eye in battle. We don't talk about it." And then insisted Aurora be given the best seat in the kingdom, which was a couch cushion on the floor next to the coffee table. "I can't sit on the floor," Aurora said. She said it plainly, without embarrassment, the way you'd say you couldn't reach a high shelf. Chloe considered this for exactly 2 seconds. "Then your chair is your throne. Every queen has a throne. Yours just has wheels, which is actually better because you can move faster." Something crossed Aurora's face that Liam had never seen from her. Not in person, not in any of the photos he'd scrolled through on his ancient laptop. It wasn't the controlled, practiced expression she wore like armor. It was the face of someone who had just been punched in the softest part of themselves by a 7-year-old's casual kindness. That's... Yes, Aurora said. That works. Liam burned the spaghetti. Not a little. He burned it the way you burn things when you're watching someone else instead of the stove. The noodles stuck to the bottom of the pot in a gluey mass, and the sauce bubbled over onto the burner and filled the kitchen with the smell of scorched tomato. He scraped what he could into bowls and brought them out, and Aurora looked at hers with the expression of someone who probably had a personal chef at home and was now staring at what could generously be described as a war crime against Italian cuisine. "It's usually better than this," he said. "It's always like this," Chloe corrected. Aurora ate every bite. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way she seemed to do everything, and she didn't complain. Chloe talked the entire time, about school, about her friend Maya, who could burp the alphabet, about how Daddy had promised to fix her bike chain for 2 weeks and hadn't done it yet. "I've been busy," Liam said. "You always say that." "Because I'm always busy." "Miss A, do you think that's a good excuse?" Aurora looked at Liam, then at Chloe, then back at Liam. "I think your father works very hard." "That's a politician answer," Chloe said, squinting. Liam nearly choked on his water. Aurora's mouth twitched, that ghost of a smile again, the one that fought its way through her composure like a weed through concrete. "You're right," Aurora said. "It is. The honest answer is no. It's not a good excuse. Fix the bike." Chloe pointed her fork at Liam. Said, "Fix the bike." "I heard her." He fixed the bike the next morning. That was the beginning of something Liam didn't have a name for. Aurora started coming by. Not every day. She had a company to run, board meetings, conference calls that apparently spanned 4 time zones. But 2 or 3 times a week, her black sedan would appear at the curb, and she'd wheel up the makeshift ramp that Liam had built the second weekend because he couldn't stand watching her struggle with the porch step. He didn't tell her he'd built it for her. She didn't mention it. But he noticed the way she paused the first time she saw it, the brief stillness, the way her hands rested on the wheels for just a moment before she pushed herself up the incline. She ran her palm along the railing he'd added and said nothing, and her silence said more than any thank you speech would have. She was bad at being a guest. That was the first thing Liam learned about Aurora Vale outside of a business context. She didn't know how to sit on a couch and watch TV without checking her phone. She didn't know how to eat a meal without analyzing it like a quarterly report. The first time Chloe asked her to play a board game, Candyland, the one with the missing green piece they'd replaced with a bottle cap, Aurora studied the instructions for 10 minutes before Chloe said, "Miss A, you just pick a card and move. It's not calculus." "I don't like not understanding the rules," Aurora said. "The rule is pick a card and move." "What's the strategy?" "There is no strategy. It's Candyland." Aurora played 3 rounds and lost all 3, and each loss seemed to genuinely bother her in a way that was both absurd and oddly endearing. She wasn't used to losing, not at anything, and here she was, getting destroyed at a children's board game by a 7-year-old who kept making up new rules halfway through. "You can't just add a lava pit to the board," Aurora said. "I'm the queen. I can add whatever I want." "That's authoritarianism." "That's Candyland." Liam watched from the kitchen doorway, drying a plate with a towel that had a hole in it, and something warm and dangerous moved through his chest. Dangerous because he recognized it. It was the feeling of watching someone fit into a space you didn't know was empty. He pushed it down, way down, buried it under practicality and self-preservation and the 15 reasons he'd listed in his head the first night about why this was a terrible idea. But the feeling didn't stay down. Feelings never do. Weeks passed. The routine settled into something that felt almost organic, like it had always been there and they just hadn't noticed. Aurora started showing up earlier on Saturdays. She'd bring coffee, actual good coffee, the kind that came from a place with a French name that Liam couldn't pronounce, and she'd sit at the kitchen table while he made Chloe's pancakes. She learned not to comment on his cooking. He learned not to comment on the fact that she answered emails at 6 in the morning on a weekend. Chloe's soccer season started in October, and the first game was on a cold Saturday morning at a field that had more mud than grass. Liam stood on the sideline in his work jacket, clapping too loud and shouting things like, "Kick it, Chloe!" which was not helpful coaching advice, but was the only thing he could think to yell. The other parents gave him looks, some sympathetic, some annoyed, because he was louder than anyone else, and his daughter spent more time waving at him than watching the ball. He didn't expect Aurora to come. She hadn't said she would. But halfway through the first half, the black sedan pulled up to the parking lot, and the driver set up the ramp, and Aurora wheeled herself across the uneven ground to the sideline. She was wearing the dark blue coat again, and a scarf that probably cost more than every other garment at the field combined. Her wheels sank slightly in the soft grass, and she had to work harder to move, but she made it to the sideline and parked herself next to Liam without saying a word. Chloe saw her from the field. She stopped mid-run, waved both arms over her head, and screamed, "Miss A came!" so loud that the referee blew the whistle because he thought something was wrong. "She's enthusiastic," Aurora said. "She gets that from her mother." It was the first time he'd mentioned Jess in front of Aurora. He hadn't planned it. It just came out, the way true things do. Without permission, without ceremony, without any of the careful packaging that usually surrounded the subject of his dead wife. Aurora didn't flinch. She didn't offer condolences or make the face people always made. The tilted head, the soft eyes, the sympathetic frown that Liam had learned to hate because it turned Jess into a tragedy instead of a person. "What was she like?" Aurora asked. "Loud," Liam said. Loud and stubborn, and she laughed like she was trying to fill up a whole room with it. She would have embarrassed Chloe way more than I do at these games. "Hard to imagine more embarrassing than what you've been doing." "Thanks." "I mean it as a compliment. You're fully committed." They watched the rest of the game together. Chloe's team lost 7-2. Chloe scored neither goal but did an impressive somersault during halftime that had nothing to do with soccer. Afterward, she ran to Aurora and threw her muddy arms around her before anyone could stop her, leaving brown handprints on Aurora's expensive coat. "Oh, Chloe, be careful," Liam started. "It's fine," Aurora said, and she put her arms around the girl carefully, like she was holding something she was afraid she might break. Her hands were uncertain, one on Chloe's back, the other hovering near her shoulder, not quite committing to the embrace, like she wanted to hold on but didn't trust herself to do it right. Liam watched, and the dangerous feeling in his chest came back, and this time he didn't push it down fast enough. The conversation started happening at night, after Chloe was asleep. Aurora would stay later and later until the evening stretched past 8, past 9, past the point where it was reasonable for a guest to still be in your house. They'd sit at the kitchen table with mugs of bad coffee. Liam refused to use her fancy stuff at night because he said it was wasted on tiredness. And they'd talk. Not about business, not about contracts or proposals or the thing that had brought her to his door in the first place. They talked about the real stuff, the stuff that lives underneath everything else. "I was in the hospital for 119 days, Aurora said one night. The kitchen was dark except for the light over the stove, and her face was half in shadow. The first month I couldn't move anything below my chest. I could feel the catheter and the IVs and the tube down my throat, and I couldn't move. I just lay there and stared at the ceiling and counted the tiles. 312 tiles. I counted them so many times I still see them when I close my eyes." Liam didn't say anything. He'd learned that with Aurora, silence was more useful than words. She wasn't looking for comfort. She was looking for someone who could hear it without trying to fix it. "When they told me I wouldn't walk again, I didn't cry. Everyone expected me to cry. The doctors, the nurses, the therapists they sent, they all had that look. You know the look, the gentle voice, the careful words, and I just didn't cry. I think they thought I was in denial." She wrapped her hands around the mug. The tremor in her left wrist was more visible at night when she was tired. "I wasn't in denial. I was furious. I was so angry I couldn't breathe. I lay in that bed and I thought, I will build something so big and so powerful that no one will ever look at me with that face again. No one will ever pity me. No one will ever think I'm less than anyone who can walk out of a room." "And you did." "I did. And it didn't fix anything." She looked at him. I built a $3 billion company, and I go home to an empty penthouse every night and eat dinner alone and talk to no one until my assistant calls in the morning. I proved everyone wrong, and the prize for that is a very expensive kind of loneliness. Liam turned his mug in his hands. The coffee was cold, but he drank from it anyway because it gave him something to do while he decided how much to say. After Jess died, he said slowly, I didn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. Chloe was 2. My sister flew in from Oregon and took care of her because I couldn't. I physically could not make myself stand up. Not because of grief, Seb. It was grief, but it was more than that. It was this feeling like the floor had disappeared, and if I stood up, I'd fall through. He'd never told anyone this. Not Danny, not Mrs. Huang, not the therapist he'd seen for 4 sessions. He'd kept it sealed inside him like something radioactive, something that would contaminate everything it touched. When I finally got up, it was because Chloe started crying. And my sister was in the shower, and there was no one else. She was crying in her crib, and I had to go to her. That was it. That was the whole reason. Not strength, not courage, just my kid was crying and no one else was there. Aurora was watching him with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable from anyone else. But from her, it felt like attention, real attention, the kind that costs something. That's why I said no to your proposal, he said. Not because it was crazy, although it was, but because the thing you're looking for, the thing you think a child will give you, it doesn't come from a contract. It doesn't come from planning or control. It comes from the 2 a.m. moments when everything's falling apart and you do it anyway because someone needs you to. I know that now, she said. Do you? I'm learning. She looked down at her hands. Slowly, badly. But I'm learning. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He didn't think about it. It just happened, the way his hand had moved to catch Chloe's 1,000 times when she was about to fall. Aurora went still. Her whole body went rigid, like a current had passed through her, and for a moment he thought he'd made a terrible mistake. Then her hand turned under his, and her fingers closed around his palm, and she held on. They sat like that for a long time. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. The house made its old house noises, creaks and settlings, and the soft rattle of the window frames in the wind. And outside, the world kept spinning the way it always does, indifferent to the 2 people in the kitchen who had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Neither of them talked about it afterward. Not that night, not the next day. Aurora came by on Tuesday and helped Chloe with math homework, explaining fractions using slices of pizza because Chloe refused to learn from the textbook, and Liam cooked dinner and nobody mentioned the hand-holding in the kitchen. It was too new, too fragile, too easy to shatter with the wrong word. But something had shifted. The air between them was different now. When Aurora handed him a coffee mug, their fingers brushed and neither of them pulled away. When he leaned past her to grab a dish towel, he was aware of the smell of her, something clean and expensive and warm underneath, in a way that made his chest tight. When she laughed at something Chloe said, really laughed, not the controlled almost smile but a full surprise sound that escaped before she could catch it, he found himself staring at her mouth and had to look away. Danny noticed something was different before Liam admitted it to himself. You're humming, Danny said on the job site one Wednesday morning. I don't hum. You're literally humming right now. You were humming while you carried cinder blocks. Who hums while carrying cinder blocks? I wasn't humming. Hayes, I've worked with you for 3 years. You don't hum. You don't whistle. You barely talk. And now you're humming. Something happened. Danny set down his drill and crossed his arms. Is it a woman? No. It's absolutely a woman. Drop it, Danny. What's her name? I said drop it. You'll tell me eventually. You always tell me eventually. Liam didn't tell him, not because he didn't trust Danny, but because he didn't know what to say. What was Aurora to him? She wasn't his girlfriend. They hadn't kissed, hadn't been on a date, hadn't done any of the things that normally defined whatever this was. She was a billionaire who came to his house 3 times a week and played Candyland with his daughter and drank bad coffee at his kitchen table and told him things about herself that he suspected she'd never told anyone. There wasn't a word for that, not one he knew. Halloween came at the end of October, and Chloe wanted to be a dragon. Not a princess, not a witch, not any of the costumes available at the store on 9th Street. A dragon, specifically a fire-breathing dragon with wings that actually move, which was a tall order for a man whose craft skills peaked at building a wheelchair ramp out of 2x4s. Aurora showed up the Saturday before Halloween with a bag from a craft store and an expression of determined concentration that Liam recognized from his time reading about her business career. "I've researched dragon costume construction," she said. "Of course you have. There are several viable approaches. I've selected the one with the best ratio of visual impact to structural feasibility. You analyzed costume options like a business case. I analyze everything like a business case. We've discussed this." They spent 4 hours in the living room cutting fabric and bending wire and hot gluing scales made from painted egg cartons. Aurora directed the project with the same intensity she probably brought to billion-dollar development deals, issuing instructions and quality checking every scale. Liam did the physical work, cutting, bending, stitching, because his hands were steadier and because he liked watching Aurora try to use scissors from her wheelchair and refused to ask for help even when the fabric slid off her lap for the 3rd time. "Let me hold that for you," he said. "I can manage." "You've cut the same piece wrong twice. The fabric is uncooperative." "The fabric is fine. You're sitting at a weird angle." She glared at him. He held her gaze, and then, without warning, she handed him the scissors and the fabric, and their fingers touched, and neither of them looked away this time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." Chloe came downstairs an hour later, tried on the half-finished costume, and declared it the greatest dragon in history. She roared at Gerald the frog, who fell off the couch. She roared at Liam, who pretended to be terrified. Then she roared at Aurora, who didn't pretend, who flinched, genuinely, at the sudden noise, and then laughed, really laughed, the full, unguarded sound that came out of her so rarely that every time it happened, Liam felt like he'd witnessed something valuable and fleeting. That night, after Chloe was in bed and the dragon costume was hanging from the closet door, Aurora sat in the living room surrounded by craft supplies and hot glue strings and looked more relaxed than Liam had ever seen her. Her hair was slightly undone. There was a smear of green paint on her cheek. She looked nothing like the woman on the magazine covers. She looked human. "This is the longest I've gone without checking my email since the accident," she said. "How does it feel?" She thought about it. "Terrifying," she said, "but the good kind." Liam sat on the couch next to her wheelchair and stretched his legs out. His back ached from bending over costume pieces all afternoon, and his fingers were covered in hot glue burns, and he was more tired than he usually was after a full shift on the job site. But it was a different kind of tired, the kind that comes from making something instead of just surviving something. "Aurora," he said. "Yes?" He wanted to say something about how the house felt different when she was in it, how Chloe talked about her all week between visits, how he'd started leaving the kitchen light on when she was coming over because he'd noticed she always looked at it through the window when she arrived and he wanted her to see it. But the words were too big for the moment, and the moment was too fragile for the words, so instead he said, "You've got paint on your face." She touched her cheek. Wrong side. He reached over and wiped the smear with his thumb, and his hand stayed on her cheek a beat too long, and she didn't pull away, and the space between them narrowed to almost nothing. "Liam," she said, and her voice was different, not controlled, not measured, just his name, spoken like it meant something she hadn't decided how to say yet. He pulled his hand back, not because he wanted to, but because the moment deserved more than impulse. Whatever was growing between them, this strange, improbable, inconvenient thing, it deserved to grow at its own pace, in its own time, without either of them forcing it into a shape it wasn't ready to hold. "Good night, Aurora," he said. "Good night, Liam." She left. He stood on the porch and watched the sedan pull away, and the night was cold and clear, and the porch light cast a yellow circle on the wood where her wheelchair had been. He stood there for a long time, feeling the ghost of her cheek against his thumb, feeling the weight of everything he hadn't said pressing against the inside of his chest like water behind a dam. Then he went inside and cleaned up the craft supplies and checked on Chloe and brushed his teeth and got into bed. And for the first time in 5 years, the loneliness felt less like a roommate and more like a departing guest. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in November, tucked inside an envelope so thick and creamy it felt like holding a piece of wealth. Chloe pulled it from the mailbox along with a grocery store flyer and a water bill and handed the whole stack to Liam when he walked through the door, still dusty from the job site, still wearing his steel-toed boots because he'd forgotten to take them off on the porch again. He almost missed it. The envelope was addressed to him. His full name, Liam Michael Hayes. But the return address was a crest he didn't recognize. Gold embossing, Latin motto, the kind of branding that said old money and high walls. He tore it open while Chloe sat at the kitchen table working on a worksheet about weather patterns, and he read it once, then twice, then a third time, because his brain refused to process what he was seeing. Whitfield Academy was pleased to inform Mr. Hayes that his daughter, Chloe Elizabeth Hayes, had been accepted into their spring semester program. Full scholarship. All tuition, materials, uniforms, and extracurricular fees had been covered by an anonymous benefactor. A welcome packet would follow. Liam set the letter on the counter. He stared at it. Then he picked up his phone. Aurora answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring when it was him, which was something he'd noticed and filed away without examining too closely. "Did you do this?" he said. A pause. Not long, but enough. "Did I do what?" Don't do that. Whitfield Academy, the acceptance letter, the full scholarship from an anonymous benefactor. Did you do this?" Another pause, longer this time. He could hear something in the background, the muffled sound of an office, phones ringing, someone talking, and then a door closing and the background going quiet. "Yes," Aurora said. The word landed in his chest like a fist. "When?" "I submitted the application 3 weeks ago. I spoke with the head of admissions, provided the necessary documentation, and arranged the financial 3 weeks ago. You've been coming to my house, sitting at my table, playing games with my daughter, and you did this 3 weeks ago and didn't tell me. I wanted it to be a surprise." "A surprise?" He laughed, and it came out ugly. "You enrolled my kid in a school I've never heard of, paid for it with your money, and didn't think to ask me first. That's not a surprise, Aurora. That's a decision you made about my daughter without my permission." "Liam, Whitfield is one of the best schools in the state. Their STEM program, I don't care about their STEM program. She's brilliant. You know she's brilliant. Her public school doesn't have the resources to. Her public school's fine. It's not fine. The class sizes are 32 students. The building failed its last 2 inspections. And her math curriculum is 2 years behind where she should be based on her aptitude. I had her tested." "You had her what?" The silence this time was different. It was the silence of someone who had just heard themselves say something they should have kept inside. He could almost feel Aurora recalculating on the other end of the line, running the numbers the way she did, searching for the angle that would make this sound reasonable. "During homework sessions," she said carefully, "I gave her some additional problems, diagnostic-level problems. She solved things that most 9-year-olds can't. She's 7. Exactly my point. No, that's not your point to make." Liam pressed his palm against the counter. The letter sat there beside his hand, looking expensive and important, and completely wrong. "You tested my kid without telling me. You applied to a school without telling me. You paid for everything without telling me. You made decisions about her life. Her life, Aurora, not a development project. And you did it the way you do everything. You found a problem, you threw resources at it, you engineered the outcome you wanted, and you never once stopped to think that maybe the person who's been raising her alone for 5 years should have a say. I was trying to help. I didn't ask for your help. You shouldn't have to ask. That's the whole... Liam, I see her potential. I see what she could become if she had the right... The right what? The right school? The right funding? The right benefactor pulling strings behind the scenes?" His voice was rising. He glanced at the hallway to make sure Chloe's door was still closed. "You want to know what Chloe needs? She needs her dad to pick her up on time. She needs someone to show up at her soccer games. She needs breakfast in the morning and a story at night, and someone who's there, physically there, not buying her opportunities from a penthouse office. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Aurora. You showed up at my house with a contract asking me to make you a baby. I said no. And then you came back and you were different, and I thought you understood. I thought you were learning that people aren't projects. That Chloe isn't a project. That I'm not a project. You're not a project. Then why does this feel exactly like one? She didn't answer. He could hear her breathing on the other end. Controlled, deliberate, the way she breathed when she was trying not to let something crack open. I have to go, he said. Liam, I have to go. He hung up. Then he stood in the kitchen with his hands on the counter and his eyes closed, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, the specific burning anger that comes from caring about someone enough to be truly hurt by them. Not the dull irritation of a bad day or the frustration of a broken appliance. This was the sharp, personal kind, the kind with teeth. Chloe appeared in the doorway. Daddy, are you mad? No, sweetheart. You look mad. I'm just tired. You always say that when you're mad. He opened his eyes and looked at his daughter. She was standing there in her pajamas, the ones with the dinosaurs, the ones that were getting too short in the legs because she was growing faster than he could keep up with. And she was watching him with that squinting expression she'd inherited from Jess, the one that meant she wasn't buying what he was selling. Come here, he said, and she crossed the kitchen and let him pick her up, even though she'd started telling him she was too old to be picked up. He held her against his chest and breathed in the smell of her hair, strawberry shampoo and the faint sweetness of childhood, and told himself that this was the thing that mattered. This. Not the letter, not the school, not Aurora Vale, and her money and her inability to love without trying to engineer the outcome. This. He didn't call Aurora. She didn't come by on Wednesday or Thursday. Friday passed with no sedan at the curb, no knock at the door, no coffee in the kitchen. The house felt different without her in it. Not empty exactly, because it had been just him and Chloe for 5 years, and they knew how to fill the space. But different. Like a room after you've moved a piece of furniture and you can still see the impression it left in the carpet. Chloe noticed immediately. Is Miss A coming today? She asked Saturday morning over pancakes. Not today. Is she coming tomorrow? I don't know, Chloe. Did you have a fight? We had a disagreement. That's what Mrs. Huang calls a fight. Chloe poured too much syrup on her pancakes. Way too much. A crime scene amount of syrup. Is she coming back? Liam looked at his daughter. She was trying to sound casual, but her eyes gave her away. They were doing that thing, that wide, anxious thing, that she'd done in the months after Jess died, when every time someone left the house, she wasn't sure they'd come back. Yeah, he said, even though he wasn't sure. She'll come back. Okay. Chloe stabbed a piece of pancake. Because Gerald misses her, not me. Gerald. Tell Gerald I understand. Danny cornered him on Monday at the job site. They were eating lunch on an overturned bucket near the east wall, sharing a bag of pretzels because Danny had forgotten his lunch again, and Liam's consisted of a sandwich he'd made at 5 in the morning that had the structural integrity of a wet napkin. You look like garbage, Danny said. Appreciate that. I'm serious. You've got that face. The face you had after your truck died and you couldn't afford the repair. My truck's fine. So it's the woman. Liam took a bite of his collapsing sandwich and didn't answer. Listen, I know you don't want to talk about it, Danny said, and I respect that. But I also know what it looks like when a guy's miserable because he's too stubborn to call someone, and buddy, you are textbook right now. She overstepped. Okay? How? Liam told him. Not all of it. Not about the original proposal, not about the late-night conversations, not about the way her cheek had felt under his thumb, but about the school, the letter, the testing, the decisions made without his knowledge. Danny listened, chewing pretzels, nodding. When Liam finished, Danny was quiet for a moment. Yeah, that's bad, he said. She shouldn't have done that. I know. But can I say something you won't like? Probably not. I'm going to anyway. When Sarah and I were still married, she used to do stuff like that. Not the billionaire version, obviously, but the same idea. She'd sign the kids up for things without asking me. She'd rearrange the house. She'd make plans. And I used to get so mad about it. And one day my therapist, yes, I went to therapy, shut up, asked me why it made me so angry. And I said because she didn't respect me enough to ask. And my therapist said, or is it because you're afraid that if someone else makes decisions, you're not needed? Liam stared at him. I'm not saying your situation is the same, Danny said quickly. The school thing is objectively messed up. She should have asked, period. But I'm saying, maybe there's more than one thing going on here. Maybe you're mad about the school, and you're also mad because she got close enough to hurt you, and you didn't plan on letting anyone get that close again. When did you get insightful? I've always been insightful. You just never listen. Liam didn't call Aurora that night either, but he thought about what Danny said. He thought about it while he heated up leftover pasta for Chloe, and while he helped her brush her teeth, and while he read her a chapter of the book they were working through. A story about a girl who trained dragons, because Chloe was still on a dragon kick from Halloween. He thought about it while he sat in the kitchen alone, in the chair Aurora usually sat in, drinking coffee that wasn't as good as what she brought. Danny was right. He hated that Danny was right, but Danny was right. The school thing was real. She had overstepped, and she needed to understand that she couldn't do that. But underneath the anger about the school was something older and deeper and harder to look at. The fear. The specific, paralyzing fear of letting someone matter enough to disappoint you. He'd built his whole life around not needing anyone after Jess, and Aurora had walked through that wall, wheeled through it, like it was made of paper, and now he was standing in the wreckage trying to pretend the wall was still there. It was Wednesday night when the sedan appeared again. He heard the engine before he saw it. He was on the porch, fixing a loose board, one of those small repair jobs he did when he couldn't sleep and needed his hands busy. And the black car pulled up to the curb and sat there for a full minute before the driver got out and set up the ramp. Aurora wheeled herself up the sidewalk slowly. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp he'd built for her. The porch light caught her face, and she looked different. Not physically. She was wearing the same kind of clothes, the same simple jewelry, the same pulled-back hair. But something behind her eyes had shifted. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I'm not here to argue, she said. Okay. And I'm not here to justify what I did. Okay. I'm here because your daughter called me. Liam set down his hammer. She what? She found my number. I don't know how. She's 7, she shouldn't be able to operate a phone. But she called me this afternoon and told me that Gerald was sick and needed me to come check on him. Liam closed his eyes. Of course she did. Gerald's not sick, he said. I'm aware. Aurora's hands rested on her wheels, but she wasn't moving. She was just sitting there at the bottom of the ramp, looking up at him. But your daughter called a woman she barely knows because she missed her, and I think that matters more than whether I was right or wrong about a school. You were wrong about the school. I was wrong about the school. She said it without hedging, without caveats, without the corporate qualifiers he'd come to recognize. Just the raw admission, sitting out there in the cold air between them. I was wrong. I did what I've always done. I saw a problem, and I threw a solution at it, and I didn't consider the people involved, because considering people is the part I'm worst at. I've been worst at it my entire life. It's not just a flaw, Aurora. With my kid, it's serious. I know. You can't do that. You can't make decisions about her behind my back. I don't care how good the school is. I don't care how smart she is. She's my daughter, and I get to decide. I know. Aurora's voice cracked on the second word. Just barely, just a hairline fracture, but he heard it. I know, and I'm sorry, not the corporate sorry. Not the I apologize for any inconvenience sorry. I'm sorry the way a person is sorry when they've hurt someone She stopped. Her hands gripped the wheels. Someone they care about. Liam sat down on the porch step. The cold seeped through his jeans and the loose board creaked under his weight. He was at her eye level now, and he could see everything on her face. The tiredness, the uncertainty, the fear that lived underneath her control like a second skeleton. You know what the worst part is? He said. It's not the school. I can deal with the school. The worst part is that for 3 weeks you sat at my table and looked me in the eye and kept a secret. And I trusted you. I let you into my house and into my kid's life, and I trusted you, and that's not something I do, Aurora. I don't do that. I haven't done that since Jess. Her breath caught. He could see it. The small hitch in her chest, the way her jaw tightened against whatever was trying to come up from inside her. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I know how to run a company. I know how to close deals and manage boards and build buildings, but I don't know how to be inside someone's life without trying to fix it. I don't know how to care about people without turning it into a project. It's the only way I was taught. My father loved me by working for me, by providing, by solving problems, and he never once just sat with me and asked what I wanted. And I swore I wouldn't be like him. And I'm exactly like him, and I don't know how to stop. Liam looked at her for a long time. The porch light hummed above them. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm went off and then stopped. The night was cold and ordinary, and completely unaware that something important was happening on this small porch on this small street. Come inside, he said. Liam, come inside. It's cold, and Chloe left Gerald on the couch, and I think he actually might be sick because she spilled juice on him yesterday, and he's been drying on the radiator. Aurora stared at him. Are we? Is this? We're not okay. Not yet. But you're here, and Chloe wants you here. And I'm tired of pretending that I don't want you here too. He stood up and held the porch door open. But Aurora, and I need you to hear this. If you ever go behind my back about Chloe again, that's it. No second chances, no third visits. I will close that door and it stays closed. I understand. Do you? Because understanding contracts is different from understanding what I just said. I understand, she said again, and this time the word wasn't a corporate acknowledgement. It was something rawer than that. A promise made by a woman who had never broken a business contract in her life, but had broken every personal relationship she'd ever had, and who was now, for the first time, willing to be held to a standard that had nothing to do with performance metrics or quarterly results. She wheeled up the ramp. He held the door. She crossed the threshold, and the house wrapped around her the way it always did. Warm, messy, smelling faintly of pancake batter and strawberry shampoo. Chloe was waiting in the hallway. She was supposed to be in bed. It was past 9, but she was standing there in her dinosaur pajamas with Gerald in her arms, and the moment she saw Aurora, her face broke into the kind of smile that made Liam's chest ache. I knew you'd come, Chloe said. I told Gerald you'd come. Aurora reached out and took the girl's hand. How could I not? I heard he was sick. He's better now. Chloe looked at Liam. Daddy, can Miss A read to me tonight? Liam looked at Aurora. Aurora looked back at him. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the agreement that forgiveness was possible, that the road toward it existed even if they hadn't walked it yet. Ask Miss A, he said. Miss A, will you read to me? Aurora's throat moved. A swallow. The kind of swallow you do when something is rising inside you that you're not ready to release. Yes, she said. I'd like that. She followed Chloe down the hallway, and Liam watched them go. His daughter walking, this woman rolling, both of them moving toward the small bedroom with the blue nightlight and the 17 stuffed animals, and the bed that was always unmade. And somewhere between the kitchen and the hallway, Chloe reached back and took Aurora's hand again, the way children do, without thinking, without permission, without any awareness that they're doing something enormous. Liam stood in the hallway and listened to Aurora read. Her voice was different with Chloe, softer, less controlled, stumbling over the character voices because she clearly had no experience reading children's books aloud. She gave the dragon a British accent that made no sense. She mispronounced the heroine's name twice. She was bad at it, genuinely bad, in a way that made Liam lean against the wall and put his hand over his mouth because he was smiling so hard it hurt. When she came out 20 minutes later, Chloe was asleep, and Aurora's eyes were red. She asked me to stay until she fell asleep, Aurora said quietly. She held my hand the whole time. Liam nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. Liam. Aurora looked at him, and the walls were down, all of them. Every layer she'd built over 8 years of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals and lonely penthouse nights. I don't want to be a benefactor. I don't want to be a donor or a sponsor or a silent partner. I want to be in this. I want to be in your life and in her life, and I want to do it badly and messily and without a contract, and I'm terrified, and I'm asking you to let me try. He stepped toward her. He put his hands on the armrests of her wheelchair and leaned down until his face was close to hers, close enough to see the tears she wasn't letting fall, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath against his mouth. "Then try," he said, "but do it with me, not around me." "With you," she repeated. "I can do that." "We'll see." He kissed her forehead. Not her mouth, not yet. The forehead. The place where you kiss someone when you're telling them you see them, all of them, the broken parts, and the brilliant parts, and the parts that still need work. Aurora closed her eyes and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. The weeks after that night on the porch were not a straight line. They were messy and uneven and full of the kind of small, difficult negotiations that happen when two people who are used to being alone try to figure out how to be together without destroying each other. Aurora stopped making decisions without asking. Not perfectly. She still had moments where she'd catch herself mid-sentence, already 3 steps into a plan she hadn't discussed with Liam, and she'd stop and close her eyes and physically reset like a computer rebooting. Liam learned to recognize the look. It was the face of a woman fighting 30 years of conditioning, and some days she won and some days she didn't. And on the days she didn't, he told her, and she listened, and they moved on. That was the part nobody ever talked about when they talked about love. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic confessions or the moments where music should swell and credits should roll. The real part, the part that mattered, was the Tuesday night when Aurora accidentally scheduled a doctor's appointment for Chloe without asking, and Liam found out because the receptionist called to confirm, and instead of exploding, he sat at the kitchen table and said, "We need to talk about this." And instead of defending herself, Aurora said, "You're right, I did it again, I'm sorry." And then they talked about it. Just talked. 2 adults in a kitchen, working through something without scorching the earth. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't cinematic. It was better than both. The first time Liam kissed Aurora, really kissed her, not the forehead, not the cheek, but her mouth, it happened in the most unremarkable way possible. It was a Sunday afternoon in late November, and they were in the kitchen. She was reading something on her phone, and he was washing dishes, and Chloe was at a birthday party down the street. He turned around to grab a dish towel, and she was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face, open, unguarded, like she'd forgotten to put her armor on after her shower that morning and hadn't noticed it was missing. "What?" he said. "Nothing. Nothing." "You're staring." "I'm looking. There's a difference." He dried his hands on the towel and walked over to her and kissed her. And it was clumsy because he was leaning down and she was sitting and the angle was wrong and their noses bumped and she made a small surprise sound against his mouth, like she hadn't expected it, even though she'd been looking at him like that for weeks. His hand went to the side of her face, and her hand came up and gripped his forearm, and for about 10 seconds the whole world narrowed to the space between their 2 mouths, and then Chloe's voice rang out from the front door. "I'm back! The cake was chocolate!" They broke apart. Liam stepped back. Aurora's cheeks were flushed, which was something he didn't know could happen to her. She pressed her fingertips to her lips and looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything because Chloe was already in the kitchen holding a paper plate with a slice of cake on it. "Daddy, try this. It has sprinkles inside the actual cake, not just on top. Inside." She held the plate up to him, then noticed Aurora's expression. "Miss A, are you sick? Your face is red." "I'm fine," Aurora said. "The kitchen is warm." "It's actually kind of cold in here. Daddy always keeps the heat too low." "I keep the heat at a reasonable temperature," Liam said. "Mrs. Huang says it's like a refrigerator." "Mrs. Huang is from a tropical climate. Her calibration is off." Chloe shoved the cake plate into his hands and disappeared into the living room, already narrating the party to Gerald. Liam looked at Aurora. She looked back, and something passed between them that didn't need words. The acknowledgement that whatever they were building, it had just shifted from possibility into fact. December came in cold and sharp. The job site slowed down for the season, which meant shorter hours and thinner paychecks, which meant Liam's jaw tightened every time he looked at the bills on the kitchen counter. He'd been managing the money with the same grim precision he'd used since Jess died. Every dollar accounted for, every expense weighed against necessity. He'd gotten good at it the way you get good at anything you do out of survival. Not elegantly, but effectively. Aurora saw the bills one evening when she was looking for a pen. She didn't say anything. She didn't offer money. She didn't pull out a checkbook or mention financial assistance or do any of the things the old Aurora, the one who showed up with contracts and proposals, would have done. She just put the pen back in the drawer and returned to the living room where Chloe was teaching her how to braid hair on a doll. But later, when Chloe was in bed, she said, "Can I ask you something without you getting angry?" That's never a great opening. I know, but can I? He leaned against the kitchen counter. Go ahead. Are you okay? Financially? We're fine. Liam, we're tight. We're always tight in December. Shorter shifts. It evens out in the spring. And between now and spring. He looked at her. She was sitting in her wheelchair at the kitchen table, and her hands were in her lap. And she was being so careful, so deliberately, painfully careful, not to turn this into a transaction that it was almost harder to watch than if she'd just thrown money at him. I manage, he said. I know you manage. You've been managing for 5 years. I'm asking if you're okay. There's a difference? Yes. Managing means surviving. Okay means something else. He rubbed the back of his neck. The kitchen was quiet. The fridge hummed its eternal hum. I'm not going to take your money, Aurora. I'm not offering my money. Then what are you asking? I'm asking if you'd let me help. Not with money. With, I don't know. With the weight of it. You carry everything alone. The bills, the house, Chloe, the job. You carry all of it, and you never ask for help. And I think sometimes you forget that you're allowed to be tired. Something cracked inside him. Not a dramatic crack, not the kind that makes noise and sends pieces flying. The quiet kind. The kind that happens when something that's been held together too tightly for too long finally loosens a fraction of an inch. I'm tired, he said. The words came out smaller than he expected. I'm tired all the time. I wake up tired and I go to bed tired, and in between I'm just trying to keep everything from falling apart. And most days it works. But some days I sit in my truck after work and I can't make myself turn the key because I know the second I walk through that door, I have to be someone's father, and I don't get to be tired anymore. Aurora wheeled herself toward him. She stopped in front of him and reached up and took his hand. You can be tired with me, she said. That's what I'm offering. Not money, not solutions, just somewhere to put it down for a minute. He looked at her hand around his. Her fingers were thin, strong from years of wheeling herself through a world built for people who walked. The tremor in her left wrist was barely noticeable tonight. He brought her hand up and pressed his mouth against her knuckles, and she watched him do it, and neither of them tried to turn the moment into something bigger than it was. Christmas was approaching, and Chloe had opinions. Strong opinions. She wanted a tree. A real one. Not the plastic one they'd been using for 3 years that leaned to the left and shed fake needles that got embedded in the carpet like tiny green splinters. She wanted lights on the porch. She wanted cookies. She wanted, in her words, the whole thing. Liam couldn't afford the whole thing. He could afford a tree from the lot on 7th Street if he got one of the smaller ones and negotiated. And he could afford the ingredients for cookies. And he had one working strand of lights in the garage that might last the season if nobody breathed on them too hard. Aurora showed up the Saturday before Christmas with the sedan full of boxes. Not presents, decorations, lights, ornaments, garland, the kind of Christmas supplies that came from actual stores instead of dollar bins. Liam opened his mouth to object, and she held up one hand. Before you say anything, these are from my storage unit. I've had them for years. I've never used them because I didn't have anyone to use them with. They have been sitting in a climate-controlled unit costing me $400 a month for the privilege of not being looked at. You would be doing me a financial favor by taking them. That's a stretch? I'm a businesswoman. I know how to frame a deal. Chloe was already pulling tissue paper out of boxes before Liam could argue further. The ornaments were beautiful. Glass, hand-painted, the kind that came from craft fairs and small shops, not assembly lines. Each one had clearly been chosen by someone with taste and money and absolutely no one to share them with. Aurora watched Chloe unwrap each one with the expression of a person seeing their own loneliness reflected back at them in the most unexpected way. Where did you get these? Chloe asked, holding up a blue glass bird. Different places, different years. I used to buy one every Christmas. Why only one? Because one was enough for me.
I was the only person looking at the tree. Chloe put the bird down and walked over to Aurora and wrapped her arms around her neck. No hesitation, no warning. The kind of hug only a child can give, total, overwhelming, issued without consent and revoked without notice. Now we'll look at them together, Chloe said into Aurora's shoulder. They decorated the tree that afternoon. The real tree, Liam went out and got one from the lot, a 6-footer that was slightly crooked and had a bare patch on one side that they turned toward the wall. Chloe directed the placement of every ornament with the authority of a construction foreman, and Liam lifted her up to reach the higher branches, and Aurora handed ornaments from her wheelchair, and the whole process was chaotic and imperfect and took 3 times longer than it should have because Chloe kept changing her mind about placement. When they finished and plugged in the lights, the tree looked the way Christmas trees are supposed to look, not like a magazine, not like a catalog, but like a family did it. Lopsided, overcrowded in some spots, bare in others. Real. That night, after Chloe had finally stopped rearranging ornaments and gone to bed, Liam and Aurora sat in the living room with the tree lights casting colored shadows on the walls. He was on the couch. She was beside him in her wheelchair, and at some point during the evening she'd moved close enough that her wheel was touching the couch frame, and her shoulder was almost touching his arm. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay." "My doctors told me after the accident, during the recovery, that the damage was extensive. Not just to my spine." She paused. The tree lights blinked, red, blue, green, gold, and the colors moved across her face like something alive. "I can't have children, biologically. The accident made it impossible." Liam was quiet. "That's why I came to your house with that contract," she continued. "I wasn't looking for a father. I was looking for a miracle. I thought if I could just engineer it the right way, the right person, the right agreement, the right medical team, I could fix what the accident broke. The way I fixed the company, the way I fixed everything else. Just throw enough resources at it and make it work. And when it didn't work? When it didn't work, I came back anyway. Because somewhere between Candyland and burnt spaghetti and a one-eyed frog named Gerald, I stopped looking for a miracle and found something I wasn't expecting." She turned her head and looked at him. "I found a family, not the one I designed, not the one I planned, the one that was already here." Liam reached over and laced his fingers through hers. They sat there, hand in hand, while the tree blinked its imperfect lights and the house settled around them. And outside, the first snow of the season started falling without anyone noticing. Christmas morning arrived with Chloe's shriek at 6:15, which was 30 minutes earlier than Liam had hoped and exactly what he'd expected. She tore through the living room like a force of nature, and the gifts were modest. A new backpack, a book about dragons, the art kit she'd been eyeing at the store on 9th Street. Liam had saved for weeks, cut corners on everything else, and still felt the familiar sting of not being able to give her more. Aurora gave Chloe a sketchbook. Not a fancy one. A simple, spiral-bound sketchbook from a regular art supply store. Inside the front cover, she'd written a note in her precise, careful handwriting. "For the girl who builds kingdoms, draw everything you imagine, Miss A." Chloe read it 3 times and then climbed into Aurora's lap without asking and stayed there for 20 minutes while she drew her first picture in the new book. It was a dragon, naturally. A dragon with wheels instead of legs. "That's you," Chloe said, holding it up. Aurora looked at the drawing. A green, lumpy dragon with giant wheels and a crown and a smile that took up half its face, and her eyes filled with tears she didn't wipe away. She just let them fall, right there in the living room on Christmas morning, in front of Liam and Chloe and Gerald and the crooked tree, and she didn't try to control them or hide them or explain them. Liam leaned over and kissed her temple. "Merry Christmas, Aurora." "Merry Christmas," she whispered, and her voice was wrecked, and it was the most honest she had ever sounded. The days between Christmas and New Year's blurred together in that particular way they do, long and slow and suspended outside of normal time. Aurora stayed. Not at a hotel, not in her penthouse. She stayed at Liam's house, sleeping on the couch because the bedroom doorframes were too narrow for her wheelchair, and Liam's room was upstairs anyway. She slept under a quilt Mrs. Huang had brought over,
and in the mornings Liam would come downstairs and find her already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, looking out the window at the snow-covered yard with an expression that was equal parts contentment and disbelief, like she kept expecting to wake up somewhere else. On New Year's Eve, Chloe fell asleep at 9:30 on the couch between them, her head on Aurora's leg. The television played some countdown show with the volume turned low. The house was warm. The tree lights blinked. "I want to ask you something," Liam said. "That's my line." "I'm borrowing it." He looked at Chloe, sleeping and drooling slightly on Aurora's expensive pants. "Stay." "I'm staying. I'm right here." "No, I mean stay. Not tonight. Not this week. Stay." Aurora went very still. "Liam, I live in a penthouse 40 minutes from here. My office is... I know where your office is. I know where your penthouse is. I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm asking you to add to it, add us." "What does that look like?" "I don't know. We figure it out. Maybe you sleep here sometimes. Maybe we come to your place sometimes. Maybe we make it up as we go." "I don't have a contract for this, Aurora. I don't have terms or timelines or deliverables. I just have a kid who loves you and a house that feels different when you're in it, and a guy who spent 5 years convincing himself he didn't need anyone and was wrong about that." Aurora's hand found his across the back of the couch, over Chloe's sleeping head. She squeezed his fingers. The tremor in her left wrist was there, the way it always was, but tonight it felt less like a symptom and more like a pulse, something alive and persistent and refusing to stop. "I've never stayed anywhere," she said. "Not like this. Not with someone. I know. I'll be difficult. I know that too. I'll try to control things. I'll make plans without asking. I'll work too much and forget to eat and send emails during dinner and organize things that don't need organizing." "Probably. You're not supposed to agree that fast. I've known you for 3 months. I know what I'm getting into." She laughed. The real one. The full, unguarded sound that came out of her so rarely. The one that Liam had been collecting like something precious, storing each one away in the part of himself where he kept the things that mattered most. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay. I'll stay." Chloe stirred between them, murmured something about Gerald, and went back to sleep. The countdown on television reached midnight. Somewhere outside, fireworks went off, distant, muffled. Probably the neighbors 2 streets over who did this every year, despite it being illegal in the city limits. The sound popped and crackled through the walls, and the tree lights blinked, and the snow kept falling, and the new year arrived without fanfare or ceremony, just the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock and 2 people holding hands over a sleeping child. Liam didn't make a resolution. He didn't need one. He just sat there in the warm, imperfect quiet, holding the hand of a woman who had arrived at his door with a business proposal and stayed for something she couldn't put in a contract, and he thought about how the most important things in his life had never been planned. Chloe hadn't been planned. This house hadn't been planned, and Aurora Vale, the most feared woman in commercial real estate, the woman who planned everything, had become the most unplanned thing of all. He fell asleep on the couch that night with his hand still in hers, and Chloe between them and the tree light still blinking, and when he woke up in the morning, stiff and cold because the quilt had slipped off at some point, the first thing he saw was Aurora watching him with that open, unguarded expression she only wore when she thought no one was looking. "Happy New Year," she said softly. "Happy New Year," he said. And for the first time in 5 years, he meant it. The proposal happened on a Wednesday in March, and it was nothing like either of them would have predicted. Liam had been thinking about it for weeks. Not in the way Aurora would have. No spreadsheets, no timelines, no strategic analysis of optimal ring selection. He'd been thinking about it the way he thought about most important things, in the spaces between everything else, while hauling plywood, while waiting for Chloe's soccer practice to end, while standing at the kitchen sink washing the same plate for the 3rd time because his mind was somewhere else entirely. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a speech. He didn't have a plan. What he had was a Wednesday evening in March, when the weather was finally starting to warm up, and the kitchen smelled like the chicken he'd actually cooked well for once. Not burnt, not raw in the middle, legitimately edible. And Chloe was sitting on the counter, swinging her legs, while Aurora reviewed something on her tablet, and the light from the window was doing something ordinary and beautiful to the side of Aurora's face, and he just said it. Marry me. He said it the way you'd say, pass the salt. No preamble, no getting down on one knee, no music, just two words tossed into the kitchen air between a 7-year-old swinging legs and the sound of the faucet dripping because he still hadn't fixed the washer. Aurora looked up from her tablet. What? Marry me. Liam, I'm in the middle of a quarterly. I don't care about your quarterly. Marry me. She stared at him. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He had never seen Aurora Vale at a loss for words. He'd seen her handle hostile board meetings, negotiate with city councilors, and explain fractions to a 7-year-old using pizza, all without hesitating. But right now, in this kitchen, she was staring at him like he'd said something in a language she didn't speak. Chloe stopped swinging her legs. She looked at her father, then at Aurora, then back at her father. Her eyes went enormous. Are you for real right now? Chloe whispered. I'm for real right now. Chloe screamed. Not a word. A sound. A pure explosion of 7-year-old joy that rattled the plates in the cabinet and probably alarmed Mrs. Huang next door. She launched herself off the counter and Liam caught her out of reflex, and she was bouncing in his arms, screaming, "Say yes! Say yes! Say yes!" Aurora still hadn't spoken. She was sitting in her wheelchair at the kitchen table with her tablet in her lap, and her mouth slightly open, and her eyes doing something he'd never seen them do. Flickering, rapid, like her brain was processing too many things at once and couldn't land on any of them. I don't have a ring, Liam said. I don't have a plan. I was going to wait until I could afford a ring and figure out something better than this. But I'm standing in my kitchen and you're sitting at my table and my kid is screaming in my ear and I don't want to wait for the perfect version. The perfect version doesn't exist. This is what I've got. Me, asking you right now with chicken on the stove and no ring and a kid who's going to rupture my eardrum if you don't answer. Aurora's eyes filled with tears. Not the quiet, controlled tears of Christmas morning. These were the messy kind. The kind that came with a crumpled face and a sound from the back of her throat that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Her tablet slid off her lap and hit the floor, and she didn't even glance at it, which was maybe the most shocking part of the entire moment. Yes, she said. The word came out broken and wet, and barely audible under Chloe's continued screaming. Yes, obviously yes, you ridiculous man. Liam set Chloe down, or tried to. She clung to his neck like a barnacle, and crossed the kitchen and kissed Aurora. And it was messy because he was crying too, and Chloe was trying to climb both of them simultaneously, and the chicken was starting to smell like it might be burning after all. And Mrs. Huang opened the back door because she'd heard screaming and thought something was wrong, and the whole thing was chaotic and loud and imperfect and exactly right. What happened? Mrs. Huang demanded from the doorway. Daddy asked Miss A to marry him, Chloe shrieked. Mrs. Huang put her hand over her heart. Then she walked to the stove and turned off the chicken. Someone had to save dinner, she said, and then she was crying too. And the kitchen was full of people crying and laughing and a 7-year-old trying to organize a celebration with Gerald as the guest of honor. Later, after Mrs. Huang had gone home, and Chloe had finally stopped vibrating with excitement and fallen asleep in her dragon pajamas with Gerald clutched to her chest, Liam and Aurora sat on the porch in the dark. She had a blanket over her legs. He was sitting on the step beside her, his back against the railing. The street was quiet. A dog barked somewhere. The porch light hummed. I don't know how to be a wife, Aurora said. I don't know how to be a husband again. We're a terrible match on paper. We're a terrible match on every paper. She reached down and found his hand. I'm going to be difficult. You've mentioned that. I'll try to control things. You've mentioned that too. I'll probably try to reorganize your entire kitchen within a week. The kitchen could use reorganizing. She squeezed his hand. I'm serious, Liam. I don't know how to do this. I've never been someone's partner. I've been a CEO. I've been a boss. I've been the person at the top of every hierarchy in every room I've walked into. But a partner, an equal, someone who gets to see me when I'm wrong and tired and scared, I've never been that. Neither have I, not for a long time. What if I'm bad at it? You will be, sometimes, so will I. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be reassuring. It's supposed to be honest.
He tilted his head back and looked at the sky. No stars. Too much light pollution for stars. Just the flat orange glow of a city that never got dark enough. You know what I've learned from raising Chloe alone? That the people who are good at this stuff, the parenting, the loving, all of it, they're not good at it because they figured out the formula. They're good at it because they keep showing up on the days when they're terrible at it. That's either profound or you're very tired. Both, definitely both. She laughed, the real one. And then they sat on the porch in the cold March air and didn't talk for a while, which was something they'd learned to do. Be together without filling the silence. It had taken Aurora months to learn that. Months of reaching for her phone, months of starting sentences she didn't need to start, months of slowly, painfully accepting that sometimes the most valuable thing you could give someone was your quiet presence and nothing else. The wedding was small. So small that calling it a wedding felt generous. It was more like a gathering with paperwork. They held it in the backyard on a Saturday in June, with a justice of the peace who had a mustard stain on his tie and a habit of mispronouncing solemnly. Danny was Liam's best man, wearing a suit he'd clearly rented that morning, based on how aggressively the pants were creased. Mrs. Huang sat in the front row, a folding chair on the grass, and cried through the entire ceremony. Chloe was the flower girl, which she interpreted as a license to throw handfuls of petals directly at people's faces. Aurora wore white. Not a gown. A simple white dress, fitted, elegant, the kind of thing that said, "I'm not pretending this is something it isn't." She wheeled herself down the aisle, which was just the path between two rows of folding chairs, and when she reached Liam, she looked up at him and said very quietly, "Your tie is crooked." "I know. I could fix it." "I know you could." She fixed it anyway. He let her. And the justice of the peace started talking, and Liam heard maybe half of what he said because he was too busy looking at Aurora and thinking about the night she'd shown up on his porch in the rain with a contract and a proposal that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with control, and how far they'd come from that night to this one. When the justice of the peace said, "You may kiss the bride," Liam bent down and kissed her, and this time the angle wasn't wrong. This time it fit. The first months of marriage were an adjustment that nobody in any self-help book adequately prepared them for. Aurora kept her penthouse. She needed it for work, for the early mornings and late nights when the commute to Liam's house didn't make sense. But she spent most nights in the small white house with the peeling paint and the leaking bathroom ceiling that Liam had patched for the fourth time. They argued about money. Of course they did. Aurora wanted to renovate the house. Not out of charity, but because the bathroom ceiling was genuinely dangerous and the electrical wiring predated safety standards by about 2 decades. Liam wanted to handle it himself on his timeline, with his budget, because accepting help still felt like admitting failure. "This isn't about pride, Liam. The wiring in the upstairs hallway is a fire hazard." "I'll get to it." "When? You've been saying that for 3 months. When I can afford it." "You married a billionaire." "I married you, not your bank account." "That distinction is going to feel very academic when the house burns down." They compromised. Liam agreed to let Aurora pay for the electrical work, the actual safety issues, nothing else, on the condition that he did the labor himself where he could, with his crew, at cost. It took 2 weekends and cost a fraction of what Aurora's contractors would have charged. And the wiring didn't catch fire, and Liam only electrocuted himself once, mildly, in a way that Aurora absolutely was not allowed to know about. Danny naturally told her immediately. Mild was Danny's word. He screamed was Danny's clarification. "It was a small shock," Liam said through gritted teeth while Aurora examined his hand. "You have a burn mark on your index finger. It's barely a burn. It's charred. That's an exaggeration." "I can see bone." "Now you're definitely exaggerating." She kissed his burned finger and told him he was an idiot, and he told her she was controlling, and they looked at each other and both of them were almost smiling, and Chloe walked through the kitchen and said, "You guys are weird," and that was the end of it. Summer passed. Fall came again. Chloe turned 8 with a party in the backyard that involved a dragon piñata Aurora had ordered from an artist in Brooklyn, which felt like overkill until Chloe saw it and screamed so loud the dog 2 houses over started barking and didn't stop for an hour. Liam watched his daughter swing a baseball bat at a papier-mâché dragon while Aurora handed out cake from her wheelchair, and he felt something settle inside him. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of the thing that had been living in his chest since Jess died. The hollow space. It wasn't gone, not entirely. Maybe it never would be entirely. But it was smaller now, quieter, like a room that had been empty for years was finally starting to fill with furniture. It was October when Aurora came home from a doctor's appointment with a look on her face that Liam recognized. Not sadness, something past sadness. The expression of someone who had just had a door closed that they'd been keeping open a crack, just in case.
They confirmed it, she said. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her coat still on, her bag still in her lap. The damage from the accident, the specialists I saw last month, they confirmed that biological children are not possible. Not now, not ever. They'd been careful before, using words like unlikely and extremely challenging, but today they were clear. It's not going to happen. Liam sat down across from her. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He'd learned that Aurora needed silence the way other people needed noise, as a space to process, to arrange her thoughts, to decide how much she was willing to feel. I thought I'd accepted it, she said. I thought I'd made peace with it years ago. But hearing it said out loud with certainty, with no room left for maybe, it's different. It closes something. I know. You can't know. You have Chloe. You're right. I'm sorry. I don't know exactly. But I know what it feels like when something you've been hoping for stops being possible. He paused. After Jess died, I kept her voicemail greeting on my phone for 2 years. I never called it, but I kept it because as long as it existed, she wasn't completely gone. And then one day the phone company changed systems and the greeting disappeared and I called her number and heard a generic recording. And it felt like she died again. A small death, a stupid one, but it closed something. Aurora looked at him. That's not the same thing. No, but the feeling is. The feeling of a door closing all the way. She nodded. Then she did something Liam had never seen her do. She put her head down on the kitchen table, on her folded arms, and she stayed like that for a long time. He moved his chair beside hers and put his hand on her back, and the kitchen was quiet, and neither of them said anything, because some grief doesn't need to be talked through. It just needs to be sat with. The idea of adoption came later, gradually, the way all their best ideas came. Not as a sudden inspiration, but as a slow accumulation of moments that pointed in the same direction. It was Chloe who said it first. They were eating dinner one evening in late November, almost exactly a year since the Whitfield Academy letter. A milestone nobody mentioned, but everyone remembered. And Chloe looked up from her plate and said, "There's a girl in my class whose sister is adopted. She said her parents picked her, like chose her specifically. Is that real?" "Yeah, that's real," Liam said. "So some kids don't have parents and then other parents find them and choose them?" "That's the simplified version, but yeah." Chloe thought about this for a long time. Long enough that Liam and Aurora exchanged a glance over the table. The kind of shorthand glance that married people develop. The one that says, "Are you hearing what I'm hearing? If you and Miss A wanted another kid," Chloe said carefully, "you could choose one?" "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "But could you?" Liam looked at Aurora. Aurora looked at Liam. And in that look was the entire conversation they'd been having without words for weeks. The question, the fear, the hope, the risk. "We could," Liam said. "Maybe." "I think we should," Chloe said, and went back to eating like she'd just solved a minor scheduling problem rather than redirected the entire trajectory of their family. They started the process in January. Liam learned quickly that adoption involved approximately 7,000 times more paperwork than he'd imagined. Background checks, home studies, financial disclosures, interviews, training sessions. Aurora handled the administrative side with the same ferocious efficiency she brought to corporate acquisitions, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the sheer volume of documentation required to prove that you were a fit human being. Their social worker, a woman named Patricia, who had the gentle tenacity of someone who had seen every kind of family and was no longer surprised by anything, visited the house 3 times and asked questions that felt like they were designed by someone who'd studied the art of making people cry. Tell me about your biggest argument, Patricia said during the second visit, sitting in the living room with a clipboard and a smile that said, I'm kind, but I'm also watching everything you do. Liam and Aurora looked at each other. The school thing, Liam said. I enrolled his daughter in a private academy without telling him, Aurora said. Patricia's eyebrows rose. It was early, before we were together, Aurora added. I have a pattern of trying to control outcomes. I'm working on it. She really is, Liam said. She only reorganized my kitchen twice this month. The spice rack was alphabetized wrong. There's no wrong way to alphabetize a spice rack. Human was after curry, that's wrong. Patricia wrote something on her clipboard. Liam suspected it was positive because she was smiling. The matching process took months. They were shown profiles, brief, heartbreaking pages that reduced children to bullet points and case numbers. Each one hurt to read. Each one represented a kid who was waiting, and Liam found himself lying awake at night thinking about all the ones they wouldn't choose, all the kids who would keep waiting after he turned their page. Aurora dealt with it differently. She read every profile with the analytical focus she brought to business proposals, but at night, when she thought Liam was asleep, he could hear her crying. Not loudly. The muffled kind. The kind that comes from pressing your face into a pillow so no one hears. He didn't say anything about it. He just moved closer to her in bed and put his arm around her, and she didn't push him away. And in the morning, neither of them mentioned it. Then they met Ella. The file said she was 3 years old. Born in a hospital in the Bronx, placed in the foster system at 4 months, moved through 3 homes in 3 years. Hearing impaired, significant loss in both ears, aided by hearing aids that she frequently removed because they bothered her, described by her caseworker as quiet, observant, and deeply cautious of new adults. There was a photo clipped to the file, a small girl with light brown hair and enormous gray eyes that looked directly at the camera with an expression that was far too old for a 3-year-old. Not afraid, not sad, just watchful. The expression of someone who had learned very early that the world was something to be assessed before it was trusted. Aurora stared at the photo for a long time. Her, she said. Aurora, we should look at all the... Her. They drove to the foster home on a Tuesday. It was a clean, well-run facility in a neighborhood that reminded Liam of his own. Tired, but trying. The kind of place where people kept their lawns mowed and their porch lights on because they hadn't given up yet. The foster mother, a heavy-set woman named Linda, led them into a playroom where 3 children were building a tower out of blocks. Ella was not building. She was sitting in the corner with a picture book in her lap, not reading it. She wasn't looking at the pages, but holding it like a shield. Her hearing aids were out, placed neatly beside her on the carpet. Her gray eyes tracked every person in the room with the precision of a surveillance camera. When Aurora wheeled into the room, Ella looked at her, then at the wheelchair, then at Aurora's legs still and quiet beneath the blanket she'd draped over them. And something happened in the girl's face. Not a smile, nothing so obvious. A relaxation, a softening of the muscles around her eyes that said, I see something I recognize. Ella stood up. She left the book on the floor. She walked across the room directly to Aurora, navigating around the block tower and the other children without looking at them. She stopped in front of the wheelchair and looked up at Aurora and raised her arms. The universal language, the gesture every child makes when they want to be held, when they've decided, in whatever mysterious calculus children use, that this person is safe. Aurora looked at Liam. Her eyes were wide and terrified and full. Pick her up, Liam said quietly. Aurora reached down and lifted Ella onto her lap. It was awkward. Aurora had limited core strength, and Ella was heavier than she looked, and the wheelchair shifted slightly. But Ella settled against Aurora's chest, tucked her head under Aurora's chin, and put her thumb in her mouth, and the room went very still. Linda, the foster mother, was watching from the doorway. She had tears on her cheeks. She doesn't do that, Linda said quietly. She's been here 8 months, and she doesn't go to anyone. I've never seen her do that. Liam knelt beside the wheelchair. Ella turned her head and looked at him with those enormous gray eyes. He could see the small, pale scars behind her ears where the hearing aid sat. He could see the way her fingers gripped Aurora's sweater, holding on with the intensity of someone who had learned that people left and wanted to make it harder. Hi, Ella, he said, signing the words clumsily. He'd been practicing basic sign language for weeks, ever since they'd first read her file, and he was terrible at it, but he kept going. My name is Liam. Ella watched his hands move. Then she looked at his face. Then she looked at Aurora. Then she put her head back against Aurora's chest and closed her eyes. Liam sat back on his heels and felt something complete itself inside him. Not with a click, not with a dramatic shift, but with the quiet certainty of a puzzle piece finding its place. The moment when you stop looking at the picture on the box and just see the picture in front of you. This was his family, not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd lost, the one that had assembled itself piece by improbable piece from a stormy night and a woman in a wheelchair and a 7-year-old's fierce, unearned love. Aurora was looking down at Ella, and her face was doing the thing, the open, unguarded thing she only showed when her walls came all the way down. Tears were running down her cheeks, and she wasn't wiping them, wasn't hiding them, wasn't performing composure for anyone. She was just sitting there, in a foster home playroom in a tired neighborhood, holding a little girl who had chosen her, and crying because sometimes that's what the body does when it finally receives the thing it's been starving for. I think we found her, Liam said. She found us, Aurora whispered. The adoption process took 5 more months, 5 months of paperwork and home visits and court dates and the slow, grinding bureaucracy of a system designed to protect children, which it did, imperfectly and sometimes maddeningly, but ultimately well enough. Liam and Aurora learned patience, real patience, the kind that comes from wanting something desperately and being told to wait and waiting anyway. They learned ASL together, sitting at the kitchen table with YouTube tutorials and library books, quizzing each other while Chloe, who picked it up 3 times faster than either of them, corrected their grammar with the merciless authority of an 8-year-old who had found something she was better at than the adults. Ella came home on a Friday in September. The caseworker brought her in a car seat, and Chloe was waiting on the porch with a sign she'd made that said, "Welcome home, Ella," in letters so big they ran off the edge of the poster board. Aurora was beside her in the wheelchair, and Liam was standing behind them both. And when the caseworker lifted Ella out of the car and set her on the sidewalk, the little girl stood there for a moment, looking at the house. She looked at the peeling paint. She looked at the porch light. She looked at the ramp Liam had built, the one he'd originally made for Aurora, the one that now served double duty. She looked at Chloe, who was vibrating with excitement. She looked at Aurora, in her wheelchair, with the blanket over her legs and the tears already starting. She looked at Liam, who was trying very hard not to cry and failing. Then she walked up the ramp, not to the door, to Aurora. She climbed into Aurora's lap the same way she had the first time, tucked her head under Aurora's chin, and held on. Chloe knelt beside the wheelchair and put her hand on Ella's back. "I'm your big sister," she said, signing the words at the same time. Imperfect, enthusiastic, exactly right. "I've been waiting for you." Ella pulled her thumb out of her mouth and looked at Chloe. And then, for the first time since any of them had known her, Ella smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was small and tentative and uncertain, like a plant testing whether the sunlight was real before committing to growth. But it was there, and Chloe saw it, and Aurora saw it, and Liam saw it, and the caseworker saw it, and pretended to look at her clipboard so nobody would notice she was crying. The first night was hard. Ella wouldn't sleep in the room they'd prepared for her, painted lavender, with a new bed and a nightlight shaped like a star. She cried soundlessly, the way children cry when they've learned that making noise doesn't bring anyone. Aurora found her at midnight, standing in the hallway in her pajamas, her hearing aids out, tears streaming down her face in absolute silence. Aurora picked her up and brought her to the living room and sat with her in the wheelchair in the dark. She didn't turn on lights. She didn't try to talk. She just held the girl and rocked, using her arms to push the wheelchair slightly back and forth, the way a rocking chair would move if a rocking chair had wheels. Liam found them at 2 a.m, both asleep. Ella curled against Aurora's chest, Aurora's arms around the girl, the wheelchair still and quiet in the middle of the living room. He stood in the doorway and watched them breathe, and he thought about the night Aurora had first arrived on his porch, soaked, controlled, offering a contract for something she didn't understand. And he thought about how far she'd come from that woman, Not in a straight line, not in a clean arc. In the messy, circling, 2 steps forward, 1 step back way that real change happens. The way grief becomes memory, becomes acceptance. The way loneliness becomes solitude, becomes the choice to let someone in. She'd spent 8 years building walls out of money and success and control, and a 7-year-old with a one-eyed frog had walked through them like they weren't even there. And now a 3-year-old with hearing aids was sleeping against her heart like she'd always been there. Like the chair and the arms and the heartbeat were what she'd been looking for through 3 foster homes and 4 months of waiting. Liam put a blanket over both of them and went back to bed. In the morning, he found Chloe in the living room too, curled up on the couch next to Aurora's wheelchair, one hand dangling down where Ella could reach it. The 4 of them. In a small house with peeling paint and a leaky roof and a kitchen that smelled like burnt pancakes and cheap coffee. The weeks that followed were not easy. Ella had night terrors. She wouldn't eat certain foods. She flinched at sudden movements and loud sounds. Ironic, given her hearing impairment, but the body remembers what the ears can't hear. She tested boundaries the way all children do, but with an edge of desperation underneath, as if she was checking whether these people would keep her or send her back. Aurora was the one she went to. Always Aurora. It made a kind of sense that nobody discussed but everyone understood. The woman in the wheelchair and the girl who couldn't hear had found in each other a recognition that went beyond words. They were both navigating a world that hadn't been designed for them, and they did it together, side by side, in a language that was equal parts sign and silence and presence. Chloe became the big sister she'd been rehearsing to be since the day she'd said, "I think we should." She was patient with Ella in ways that surprised Liam, showing her things slowly, signing with exaggerated care, reading her picture books by pointing at each image and making faces until Ella understood. When Ella had nightmares, Chloe would climb out of her own bed and crawl into Ella's and hold her hand until the shaking stopped. "She's your kid," Danny said one afternoon on the job site, shaking his head. "That's all you, Hayes, that kindness." "Ma, she gets it from her mother," Liam said, and he meant Jess, and he also meant Aurora, and he didn't see any contradiction in meaning both. By December, their second Christmas together, Ella's first, the house had settled into something that resembled normal. Not the kind of normal that looks good in a photograph. The kind that involves Cheerios on the floor and arguments about bedtime, and Aurora trying to schedule family dinner like a board meeting, and Liam telling her to stop scheduling family dinner like a board meeting, and Chloe mediating from the couch with Gerald in her lap like a tiny, stern diplomat. They decorated the tree again. This time, Ella helped. She couldn't reach the branches from the floor, so Aurora held her in her lap, and they did it together, Ella choosing ornaments with the grave seriousness of a 3-year-old making the most important decision of her life. She chose the blue glass bird, the one Aurora had bought years ago, the one Chloe had held that first Christmas, and she held it up to the light and watched the colors move across the ceiling and signed the word for beautiful, which she'd learned from Chloe. Aurora signed it back. Beautiful. Ella placed the bird on the tree and then turned and put both hands on Aurora's face. She looked at her, studied her, the way she studied everything, with those gray eyes that missed nothing, and then she opened her mouth and said a word. It was thick and imprecise, the way speech sounds when you've never heard yourself clearly enough to know what your voice is doing, but it was unmistakable. "Mama." The kitchen went silent. Chloe's hands froze on the ornament she was holding. Liam stopped breathing. Aurora stared at the girl in her lap. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were full. The tremor in her left wrist was visible now, shaking the hand that held Ella's waist. Ella said it again. "Mama." And then she pointed at Liam and made a sound that was trying to be Dada. And then she pointed at Chloe and signed sister. And then she put her head against Aurora's chest and closed her eyes, as if she'd just finished the most important speech of her life and was now done talking. Aurora looked at Liam across the room. Tears were streaming down her face, and she was making no effort to stop them. She was letting them fall the way rain falls, without apology, without explanation, without any attempt to control the weather. "She called me Mama," Aurora whispered. "I heard," Liam said. His own voice was wrecked. I can't." She shook her head. The words wouldn't come. For the first time in her life, Aurora Vale had no language for what she was feeling. No business metaphor, no quarterly framework, no carefully constructed sentence to package the emotion into something manageable. She just sat there, holding Ella, crying, and being absolutely, irreversibly human. Chloe walked over and leaned against Aurora's wheelchair and looked up at her. "See," she said, with the simple wisdom of an 8-year-old who had understood everything from the beginning, "this is what a family is." She was right. This is what a family is. Not the version you plan, not the version you design in a boardroom or construct from a contract, not the version that comes together easily, without friction, without arguments about spice rack organization and electrical wiring and who forgot to fix the bike chain. The real version. The version that assembles itself from broken pieces. A widower who forgot how to want things. A billionaire who never learned how to need them. 2 girls who came from loss and chose love. And a one-eyed frog named Gerald who sat on the couch through all of it and never once complained. The most powerful woman in commercial real estate once believed that love could be negotiated, that family could be acquired, that the emptiness inside her was a problem to be solved with enough resources and enough control and enough sheer force of will. She was wrong, and being wrong was the best thing that ever happened to her. Because the truth, the real, uncomfortable, uncontrollable truth, is that love doesn't work like a business deal. You can't buy it. You can't schedule it. You can't put it in a folder and present it to someone on a rainy night and expect them to sign on the dotted line. Love shows up uninvited, in the middle of a mess, at the worst possible time, and it asks you to do the one thing you're most afraid of. Let go. Let go of the plan. Let go of the outcome. Let go of the idea that you can protect yourself from hurt by controlling everything around you. Let go. And trust that the people who stay, the ones who show up for burnt spaghetti and Candyland and 6 a.m. pancakes and midnight crying and all the unglamorous, exhausting, beautiful wreckage of a real life, those people are worth the risk. Liam Hayes learned that from a woman who couldn't walk but moved mountains. Aurora Vale learned it from a man who had nothing to offer except himself. And Chloe and Ella learned it the way children always do. Not from what their parents said, but from what their parents did. On Christmas morning, Liam came downstairs to find all 3 of them already awake. Aurora in her wheelchair by the tree, Ella in her lap, Chloe on the floor leaning against Aurora's wheel, all of them looking at the blue glass bird that caught the morning light and scattered it across the ceiling in tiny broken rainbows. He stood in the doorway and watched them. His family, the one he never planned, the one he almost missed, the one that started with a stranger on a porch in a rainstorm and grew into something he couldn't imagine his life without. He didn't say anything. He just walked over, sat down on the floor next to Chloe, put his hand on Aurora's knee, and watched the light move across the ceiling. Outside, it was snowing. The roof was still leaking in the bathroom corner. The fridge was still humming its eternal hum. The kitchen clock was still 2 minutes fast. And somewhere in the house, Gerald the one-eyed frog sat on a shelf in Chloe's room, missing an eye and losing his stuffing and looking exactly like what he was, a survivor, battle-scarred and well-loved, who had been there for all of it. The most important things in life can never be controlled. They can only be loved. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they love you back in ways you never could have planned.